New York University.
From New York University, you're listening to Conversations, hosted by President Andy Hamilton. In each episode, Andy talks insight, inquiry, and imagination with a leading mind from the NYU community.
Hello, everyone. Today, we welcome Molly Shannon to the podcast. Now, you may know her as the performer behind some of the most memorable Saturday Night Live characters ever created. And you have likely seen her in one of dozens of TV and film roles, for which she has received a Film Independent Spirit Award, as well as 3 Primetime Emmy Award nominations. Molly, a Tisch drama graduate, is also a best-selling author with her recent memoir, Hello, Molly, and her children's book, Tilly the Trickster. And we are delighted to have her join us today. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you, President Hamilton. I'm so honored and I'm so excited to be here talking to you.
Well, Molly, I'd like to begin, perhaps where many conversations with you begin, on the nature of comedy. And your career is so diverse and so marvelous and successful. But there's one quality, it seems to me, that is at the heart of your work, whether it's the awkward, hilarious characters you created on Saturday Night Live, or even your recent memoir, Hello, Molly. But that quality is fearless, no holds barred exposure. And in some respects, that's one of the reasons that you're so beloved. And I wanted to ask you, how did you learn to put yourself out there in such an open and sometimes vulnerable way? And were there comedians that you looked up to as models for that style of comedy?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. And I really, when I was a drama student at Tisch School of the Arts, I really learned that as far as performance goes in Alan Langdon's acting class when I was a Tisch student. We did this big exercise, and I tell this story in my book. We were studying the Arlecchino and the Italian Arlecchino that comes on to entertain. He's the comedy, portion of the show. And many of the students were renting out warehouse spaces to practice their Arlecchino. We had to do, I think it was maybe like 5-minute performance of the Arlecchino and do what's called a Lazzi, which is the performance. And it had to have beats of three jokes. Like if you're trying to come through a door, you would try once, try twice and fail. And then the third time you get through. But anyhow, I did not rent a warehouse, and I started getting nervous hearing about these students renting warehouses to practice for their Arlecchino. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't practiced at all. What am I going to do? I'm so nervous. And so the stakes were high. But then deep down in my heart as a performer, I knew that it couldn't be too planned. It had to be kind of spontaneous. That's the Arlecchino. And I knew what it was. So it was that exercise that changed things for me. I didn't practice at all. We had to sew a fake penis with a sock. All the girls, everybody would have that as part of the costume because they would use their body as part of the performance. And so that part I did do. That was the only thing. And then it came the day for my performance. And I remember standing outside the door thinking, I have not practiced at all, but I knew the rules that we had to do a couple beats of 3. And I went in and I did it. And I just went crazy, performing the heck out of it, doing the jokes and taking chances. And I just jumped into it. And I ended up getting a standing ovation. The class went crazy. And it was that moment where I realized I took a chance. I was brave. My heart was pounding. And I continued to bring that spirit to Saturday Night Live. Same thing. Yep. Kind of knowing the basic rules, the basic format, and then letting yourself kind of go. And it is brave because I was scared, Yeah.
But in that spontaneity, presumably you have a sense of where you're going to go, of how far you're going to go. Although from the story you've just told, it sounds like I was going to ask you whether there was a sketch or a character that you knew was very funny, but you actually didn't go that far. You didn't perform because it was too far out there.
Too far out there. I don't really know that, but I want to say again, also, I learned that too, also at NYU. The basis for all of my future career in show business all started at New York University. That's why training is so important. But it was the same thing when I was a student at NYU. I did work full time at a health club. I worked about 40 hours a week at Park Avenue Squash and Fitness. And then I thought, oh gosh, I'm not taking advantage of NYU enough. I should be doing the plays, So I auditioned the very last year I was there for the show called The Follies, and Madeline Olnick and Michael Sayers and David Winesek and were the producers. And basically, it was a show where we made fun of the teachers, and it was a midnight show, raucous in the Black Box Theater. And I'm forgetting somebody's name who was also involved, but I'll throw his name in later. I never like to leave anybody out. But Dan Jenks was also, he's a big producer. Yeah. He was the producer of that show too. And they were really excellent writers and producers. So I created Mary Catherine Gallagher for that show in an improv rehearsal, because we had to make up characters for the show. And Madeline Olnick, the director, said, let's just make up characters. So one day we did an exercise where you come through the door and just introduce yourself. And she said, don't overthink it, just be in the moment. And I'm going to play a snotty director. And your job is to come in the door and make up a character and try to impress me, try to get the job, because I'm a big director. And Mary Catherine Gallagher, I came in and said, hi, I'm Mary Catherine Gallagher. They ended up loving the character, putting the character in the show. And then the character became the center of that whole show. So it was in that show that I learned, wow, I think I'm good at comedy. I was a very serious actress. So it was, again, exploring that at NYU as a drama student. I feel like I never would have done that had I not worked.
You're very much focusing on taking risks and in your art, in your performance. And was there at Tisch a particular approach, a particular a style of mentoring from your teachers that really propelled you or encouraged you in the most effective way to push beyond where you might have gone in a comfort sense?
Yes. I remember that we had to do a lot of scene work in classes, and I studied also with Terry Hayden, Jacqueline Brooks, and then we did emotional work where you would recall emotional moments from your childhood. And I had never been in therapy or anything, but I remember we had to do some exercise where you would recall a kind of, sad experience from your childhood, maybe your grandmother's funeral, and you would sit in front of the class, and it was kind of like therapy. She would say, okay, close your eyes and go back there. And, what do you smell? What do you feel the carpet? What, all the senses. Yeah. And then you could go be ready to do the scene when you were kind of in that emotional place. And I remember thinking, oh, she's talking about her grandmother's funeral. I had lost my mom in a car accident when I was 4 years old. So I was like, I have darker stuff I could go into. But I remember she said, I did do my emotional exercise, and I think I went back. I don't remember specifically the memory that I went back to, but she was like, oh, my darling, if you can use that in your work, if you can access that, it will be so wonderful and deep in your work. So that, again, was all NYU, this training that I got at NYU. And then we also did scene study classes. And in the scene study, I realized I really like doing characters. It was something about, if I did a character, I didn't feel as self-conscious as if I just played myself. If I played like a Southern character, like, we're going to get new dresses, I suddenly didn't feel self-conscious. So it was a great lesson in not thinking about myself. And I learned that through, you have to study study acting. It was important. I would not have been ready had I not had that training at NYU.
Yeah, that risk taking that obviously, as you say, developed in your time at NYU. That clearly in your career and its trajectory, you've shown it's impact on your art and your performances. In other parts of your life, I'm thinking particularly you've also chosen very particular moments to leave roles. You left Saturday Night Live at a time when your career was at its height and most successful. And I wonder just the degree to which you think that development of risk-taking skills in performance, the degree to which that then allows you or helps you take risks in other parts of your life.
It's so true. When I loved Saturday Night Live so much that I wanted to leave when I was at a good point, when I loved it and I felt good. And because I lost my mom so suddenly when I was 4 years old in a car accident, I really appreciate the value of a great ending because I didn't have that with her. And I just think it makes the transition after leaving so much easier when you feel you did it with grace, feeling great. You're not staying too long. There's something so peaceful about that and nice with your post life after. So I left when I loved it. I didn't want to phone it in and stay too long. And I'm still very close to Lorne Michaels. We're very good friends. And I respect Lorne so much. And he gave me the biggest break of my life. So I just wanted a good ending because it was like the biggest break of my life. So I wanted to leave when I felt great. And it's fun. It's funny you ask about that, President Hamilton, because I think about that, like the kind of, I think it's sad when somebody's pushed out or when it's like, oh God, they stayed too long. And then they're, I think, oh my God, like I feel grateful for good endings.
Don't worry, university presidents know that feeling well.
Oh my God, that's so fun.
But I'd love, I listened to a conversation that you had with Anderson Cooper and you told a story and I'm going to ask you whether that risk-taking has ever got you into trouble. And I'm thinking particularly of a story about sneaking on an airplane.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, my friend and I were dared by my father, who was very wild. He was like, boy, that would be the greatest stunt of all if you were to stow away on an airplane. That would wind you up.
How old were you at that point?
We were maybe 12 and 13.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he just thought that'll get you on the covers of the paper. He was just kind of a daredevil and wild. My dad had that spirit. He liked fun and mischief, and he was a rule breaker, but also a very good person and tried to do good. And he was a little bit of both. He had a wild streak, but then he was also a very like sweetheart and kind and great. But so we decided we would hop a plane to New York City. We were little preteens and from Cleveland, Ohio. It was
without a ticket,
without a ticket. Yeah, it was just a boring summer day. And we thought, well, let's go try to hop on a plane. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go back and take a ballet class in Cleveland. So we were in our ballet outfits and we told my dad, we're going to go try to hop on a plane. And he was like, okay. And we told my friend Ann Pountney's brother, and he was like, you'll never get away with that. We took the rapid transit out to the airport and we saw a flight to San Francisco, a flight to New York. And I took the reins and said, let's go to New York. And this was in the 1970s. And there were no, it was before 9/11. So you could go right up to the gate. And I
remember.
Yeah, it was so much easier. And we just asked the stewardess, we were in our sweet little ballet outfits with our hair pulled back in buns and pink. We looked like prima ballerinas. And I said sweetly, oh, could we go say goodbye to my sister? And she said, sure, go ahead. And she let us on. And it was an empty flight from Cleveland to New York City. And we just ducked in the back, and then we were really nervous, and then the plane backed up and took off, and we couldn't believe it. We said Hail Marys, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with us. We were so nervous. We just held hands, and then that stewardess came around to ask us if we wanted a Coca-Cola, and she looked like she was going to pass out. She was so scared.
She realized what you'd done.
Oh yeah, she was like, oh no, I'm going to get in so much trouble. I mean, maybe she would get fired or she's in big trouble. But so we thought we were going to get in trouble when we landed. So we walked down the aisle and we saw her and we were very scared. And she just said, bye, ladies. Have a nice trip. That's it. We were in New York City.
How on earth did you get back to Cleveland? How did you?
My dad was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're there. And maybe I'll drive to New York and visit you if you could just find a hotel to stay in. But then there was no hotel that would take two minors with
Yeah.
had a credit card. So my dad said, all right, you got to come home, but I'm not paying for it. So you got to hop on one back. He was like that. So he tried to hop on a couple on the way back and it didn't work. And
Yeah.
so I'm coming to realize that my dad definitely had the spirit of go for it,
Yeah.
and kind of wild,
Clearly, at that early stage, the pull of New York City, NYU, and Saturday Night Live was already acting its magnetism.
Exactly. And you know what's so funny, President Hamilton? When we didn't know anything, I only knew about New York City really from television shows. So when we got to New York, we just asked strangers, how do you get to Rockefeller Center, which is where I ended up working. That's where we wanted to go, Rockefeller Center, So that's where the subway took us. And we walked from JFK out on the streets to the subway. It was like a 30-minute walk. And we had a great fun day in New York City, and then came back at night. And my dad did pay for it eventually.
He did.
Yeah.
He probably should have done this if he was the person who encouraged it. Molly, can I just get a little more serious? You've mentioned your father, and you've mentioned that terrible tragedy that happened early in your life. And it so often occurs that comedy and tragedy intersect in different ways. And you've spoken very movingly about that tragic moment in your life. I think you were 4 years old when your mother, your sister, and a cousin were killed in a car crash, in a car being driven by your father. And I wanted to talk to you about forgiveness, because you've also spoken very warmly about your father, yet there must have been a sense on his part of immense guilt, but also yours at that stage of not understanding, but also even blame. And it's a rather serious question in a fun conversation, but I think it's an important one for our students to hear as well, in a life of ups, but also of downs. How you found yourself able to forgive your father, and also then to take that experience and to grow from it, particularly into the spectacularly successful actress and comedian that you've become.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that night was confusing, and I wanted to really make that clear in the book, because my dad, it was like an all-day graduation party. So there had been drinking. It started in the morning. It was in Mansfield, and there was drinking. But then my dad took a nap, and then it was much later when they left. I in no way want to act like I'm letting him off the hook, but it was a confusing thing where usually my mom would drive, and my cousin also went home with us too. And my dad would, so we never fully knew if he fell asleep at the wheel after a long day with 3 children, tired, or if it was there was never a blood alcohol report. There was never definitive. So it was complicated. And also my mom was very experienced with him. She'd been with him for a long time. Her father was an alcoholic. So she would have driven, we knew people who knew who she would have. Why she didn't drive or why my cousin didn't drive, who was 25, is confusing. He would always say, I asked him to drive, and they said, no, you're fine, you can drive. And then a whole group of people let him into the car. So it was complicated. But again, this was the 70s. I'm in no way want to bail him out, but we never for sure really knew, was it that he fell asleep because he was tired, because he drove for 90 miles. It wasn't like an instant. So I think I didn't. So what a sad, tragic thing that was, but it was confusing. So I tried to lay that out in the book, because why they didn't drive. And I chose to believe my father. He always said, no, I asked them, and I believed him. I love my father. So I didn't want to just I chose to believe him. So I don't think, but it was funny, in writing a memoir, President Hamilton, you have to go back into all that stuff. And that was the really big question from the memoir. Did you blame him? And I was like, wait, I asked my childhood friends, Alice and Ann, did it seem like I blamed my father? And they said, no. They never got that attitude. I didn't like that he drank too much. That was a struggle for me. And I don't think everybody who drinks is an alcoholic or anything. I don't think that. But my dad would drink too much. He was an alcoholic. So I think that I more had, maybe I would more talk about that than the accident, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and also I did confront him when I was older. I went through a breakup with a boy when I was like in my 30s, and I was really heartbroken. And this boy canceled the trip. We were supposed to go to Palm Beach, this young man, and my dad came instead. And at that hotel, we got in an argument, and I finally did confront about the accident. I was in my mid 30s, and I said, you talk about that you lost your wife. We lost our mom. Do you ever think about that? We lost mommy. And he was like, Molly, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about the accident, and it was a very healing moment. This makes me emotional. I felt such compassion for him, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that he thinks about it every day, and the guilt that he lived with, and the guilt that must have hovered over the household. And I just felt like, of course, he didn't mean to do that. So, I looked at it as an accident, if that makes sense.
Of course, and thank you. And as your life then unfolded in your career, Molly, to what extent do you think growing up without your mother and that life with, as you said, a loving but a wild father, did that fed into the personality that you became and that you then projected on stage?
Yes, that really fed into that. He was a very loving father. He always listened to me, and he could be wild, and sometimes, like normal relationship, we could get in disagreements and stuff, but we would always work it out, and I wanted to write about a real father-daughter relationship in my book. People can judge away and go, well, what a crazy, but it's real. And I truly loved him. And what was great about him is we could always resolve it. We could always work it out, even up until he was dead. I remember telling my therapist, I was like, I feel like I need him, or we were fighting or something. She was like, I'm sure that makes him feel alive. And it did, because I was like, I need you. I want you to understand this. And he loved it. He right up to the end,
Did you laugh with him a lot? Did you practice your routines on him? Was that the kind of relationship?
I'm not really practicing my routines, but he was very silly. So when we were growing up in the house, he would say, I called it the Jim Shannon School of Acting. Because when I was little, like 11, 12, he would be like, he want the acting really real. So he loved movies. He loved Elizabeth Taylor and Easter Parade and Judy Garland. And, he was always reading memoirs about Truman Capote, and he liked the great actresses. So we would do acting exercises in the house where he would say, pretend to take a phone call, and you have to make it very real. Like, don't like trick them. And then if it didn't seem real, he would say, cut, that seemed fake. But we got so good at the fake phone calls that we could trick our friends and pretend like, hello? Oh, hi, you want to talk to Allison? Oh, she's right here. And that we would make it so real that we could really trick people. And I definitely use that in my acting. I try to be very real. Yeah. But to answer your question about, so my dad was silly. Everything was a game. If you went into a candy store, he was silly. He liked to have fun. So he liked to play a lot of games and do he was fun, very fun, I would say. Yeah, fun.
Yeah. And the role that comedy played in your life is clear. And as we go through perhaps some of the darker times as a country, as a world at the moment, with war in Europe and political polarization in the country, what role do you think comedy can and should play in the lives of our students, in the lives of all of us, in helping us get through what can be quite difficult and hard to navigate times?
Yeah, I think ultimately it is, and I do remind myself of this as a performer and working professionally in show business, that it is an extension of yourself. It's not about
Yeah.
me. If ever I get lost, I try to put myself back on a good spiritual track of it's a generous, it's giving, it's people to immerse themselves in stories where they can forget their troubles for a minute and they get immersed in the character and they understand themselves maybe through the character, and it's relaxing and they could cry or laugh, and it's a healing, the storytelling. So ultimately it's giving.
Yeah.
And I know for stand-up comedians certainly it's a complicated time, because I think I'm not a
Yeah.
stand-up, but I'm sure they feel like they can't say, and it's hard. But and that's also a very interesting conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm an actress, so I do the writing of other people, so it's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
I no, it's not escaped our notice that your signature characters, Mary Catherine Gallagher, Sally O'Malley, your own name, Molly Shannon, they all have a very strong Irish connection. And NYU,
Yeah.
in addition to being home of the greatest school of the arts in the world, Tisch, is also the home of one of the truly great centers of Irish study, the Glucksman Island House, Irish culture, language, history, music. And so I'd love to hear the way in which your Irish heritage influenced you and your comedic sensibilities.
Well, it was a very big influence. My grandmother, Mary Madden, was from Clockmore, and she and Achill Island, the wild western coast on the water. They were farmers, very poor, and they came over here with no money. They came to Cleveland, and my grandmother worked as a maid, and so they hoped for a better life. So I really think understanding what they did to be able to come to this country and make a better life for themselves makes me think about my own life and being a homeowner now, and how my ancestors fought so hard for that. It gives me a real perspective on my life. And I believe in epigenetics. I believe sometimes you might not consciously know that something's affecting you, but it can be in your body, from your ancestors. I do believe that. So I guess I always named the characters Irish names because it felt close to me and my home and where I come from and that type of thing.
Yeah, and in Ireland, there's a strong, thread of comedy and natural sense of humor that shines through so often.
Yeah, it's so true. Conan O'Brien, who's a fellow Irishman,
Irish, of course,
SNL alum, he believes that comedy is like music. He feels like with comedy writing, he feels like most comedians are usually good musicians, and that there's a rhythm to
the language, to the words and the timing of,
exactly. Isn't that interesting? But I thought
it's fascinating.
Yeah, and speaking of bravery too, I do, President Hamilton, try to force myself to do stuff that I'm uncomfortable. Like, for example, I'll push myself. I got asked to host. Steve Martin has a new book, a graphic memoir that's actually great, and he asked me to interview him for his book release. But I felt a little shy because I actually think the art of asking questions and doing what you're doing is really hard. I feel more comfortable being a guest, but I did it just to push myself. So I try to do stuff like that in my life. Just if I'm scared, I just make myself do it.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I've got a day job, so at least for the moment. Now, I want to talk about your other job, your second job, which is being a writer. And you've written a children's book. You published a children's book in 2011, Tilly the Trickster, and then, of course, more recently, you've had your best-selling memoir. And I just, I'm fascinated to get an understanding of how you switch from one role to the others, from Molly Shannon, the actress and comedian, to Molly Shannon, the author, and particularly in then finding a different voice to talk to children but
Yeah.
also finding an even further different voice in a very open and expressive memoir. And you know, how do you turn those different voices on and off in your mind?
That is really hard, but I have to say I got to a point in my life where I kind of like the quiet of a book. I think with showbiz, sometimes people go into the career because they don't, some maybe, you know, maybe they need that attention, or they're trying to resolve something in their childhood, or they feel like they're not enough. That feeling of not measuring up can certainly give you a drive in trying to make it in show business, because there is so much rejection that you keep at it. But then when I got Saturday Night Live, I was like, oh, this doesn't bring my mother back. This doesn't fix anything. So I think when I got to that place, I could be healthier with what it all means. It's not like fame fixes anything. It doesn't, you know, that type of thing. So I think in writing the book, I was at more of a place of peace where I don't mind if somebody doesn't know me or somebody doesn't recognize me, or I feel like I'm enough. And I worked hard on that in my personal life. That didn't come easy, but I like the quiet of a book. And I think if you're going to write a memoir, you have to go deep. Otherwise, what's the point? Because it's really hard. And I think it's very hard to finish a memoir. You never feel like you're done. It's very hard to let it go because it's your life story and you never really feel done. And they have to go, the publishers are like, give it to us. That's it. You got to stop, because it's really
But
hard.
it's only halfway through. So you clearly have a second volume in the years ahead.
Exactly.
And
But my editor, Dan Halpern, described it as, he's like, you know, you got the bones and then you just slap on, you keep adding flesh, a little more flesh. And then but I'm very proud of myself because I felt embarrassed writing a book. I thought nobody's going to care about this. Is so dumb and who cares? And I had to push through my embarrassment, and I'm really happy that I did it. I really was hard on myself. And the other hardest thing is getting your voice on the page. That's the hardest thing. But once you can get your voice on the page, then you're kind of moving along. But I feel, again, I challenged myself, and I'm really proud of myself that I did it. It was really one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Is there another Tilly book in the future, or was that, you know, was that very much connected to your own children and their ages at the time that Tilly the Trickster was published?
That was when my kids were little, and I wrote a book that was easy to read for parents, because I would read all these books to my children when they were little, and some of them were too. I was like, I'm out of breath. So I wrote a book that wouldn't get a parent too out of breath. It was easy to read, and
Parents are already out of breath before they sit down to read.
Exactly. So I wrote it really as a performer, like that it was fun to read. You didn't feel out of breath. You could read it again and again, and it didn't tire the parent out. And I wrote stuff that I knew my children loved. I definitely use them as like test market research. Like, do you like this story? And what about that? Do you like that photo? And I really tested it on them, and kids love the book. But I think I was really afraid to write a memoir. So I dipped in by writing a children's book first, but deep down, I knew I wanted to go deeper. And another interesting thing, President Hamilton, is, you know, it's hard when you go on talk shows, Jimmy Fallon or this or that. I love Jimmy Fallon, he's my friend, but I'm saying when you do these talk shows, you have to tell funny anecdotes. And my publicist said, oh, well, for your book, it's going to be very serious and that might be exhausting. And I don't find it exhausting at all. I'm just at a place in my life where I find telling funny little quick bits harder than actually being really serious.
Yeah. Did it take a different kind of discipline, or were you able to take the same, you know, skills that you would learn in learning your lines and in rehearsing your sketches or performances? Was that same kind of discipline applicable to writing as well, or was it more spontaneous?
That's really interesting. Yes, the same kind of discipline, because you have to put in the time. And but I didn't work too hard at it. I would just I worked with my collaborator, Sean Wilsey, who's a memoirist. He wrote a great book called Oh, the Glory of It All. It's excellent. And I didn't want to just write a traditional celebrity memoir. I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to go deeper. And so I really liked Sean. And so we collaborated. We would just send stuff back and forth, and but it's very hard because you get lost in it and you have to keep rereading it, and it's a big manuscript. Honestly, now when I see anybody who's published a book, I'm so impressed because it is really hard.
Molly, let
Yeah.
me ask a final question. And,
Yeah.
in our conversation, we've gone from your professional transitions that you've gone through in your successful career, and your artistic switching from being a comedian, being an actor, to being a writer. We've talked about some of the personal transitions that you've gone through in life. Students, we have every year we send out into the world magnificent graduates of NYU, of Tisch School of the Arts, who themselves are beginning a path, a journey in life that will take them through many transitions. And I wondered what advice that you would have for them in helping manage those different challenges and transitions that they'll have in their life. And I want to add a personal touch. This president will be going through his own transition, stepping down from the presidency in about 7 months' time. And with the experiences you've had, that advice that you would have for both students and an aging president to the next step, and how to get themselves ready for it.
I think, President Hamilton, it's so important to, with your transition that you're going through, you have had such an unbelievably fantastic run. And I think in life, it's so important to celebrate that. Otherwise, what's the point? So I always have that philosophy of like, like dust your shoulders off, and to really embrace that, I think is so important. I just think it's like, I just feel the older that I get, the more I realize that you have to work on that stuff, on happiness and joy and letting that in and soaking it in, and that it's so important. I feel as the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't want to live that way where I'm like always feeling like I'm not enough or it wasn't enough. I just don't believe that. It makes me happy when I can take in the good. So does that help at all? Is that a good?
It does.
Celebrate. Celebrate. But you have that infectious energy already about you, and I feel like you always had that in your work. It comes through, and I just want to say about you, hearing you speak to being also a part of the NYU community. You're so charismatic and real, and you're a father, and you work, and you're a leader. You understand all aspects of it, and you seem very happy with your work, and it shines brightly through.
Molly, thank you. And
I really mean that.
Thank you. And this podcast is about you and
the
celebration of you.
Okay. But what I would say to kids is, I think it's really important to just take. I worked a lot of, I said this in my graduation speech, I worked tons of little jobs. I mean, I would work at coffee shops, and I worked as a waitress, and I worked as a hostess, and I did telemarketing. And my dad was very good. He was like, that teaches the value of a buck, and do it, even if you have to, you're bussing tables, or he really taught me that. And I always had a very positive attitude, even though it was hard. And but I think it's so important. And I think you have to be realistic. You're not going to get to this, you might not be able to do your chosen profession right away. You're going to have to do these jobs, maybe a minimum wage job, and appreciate it, learn from it. It's really important. And I did that for years and years and years. Some people get breaks sooner. Yeah. I didn't. I struggled for a long time. Yeah. But I treasure those experiences. Yeah. And yeah. I liked learning about, a bank account and making money in these restaurant jobs. And now I understand, I feel like I understand that more, and I'm really glad I struggled. And what I say to people is also, I felt I was brave enough to go after what I wanted. And that alone is, many people are not, they don't do that. Like I had some people who just moved back home and they gave up on their dreams. And I thought, well, at least I'm trying for what I want. I'm going for acting, and maybe I'm not here yet, but I'm I'm pursuing what I love. So this alone is good. It's meaningful. So I always had that type of attitude. So I think that's helpful.
I had very similar experience. I worked as a busboy for many summers, during high school, during college, and I still don't think I have ever worked as intensely and as hard as I did clearing tables in a restaurant between 8 and 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. You know, the intensity of that moment and everything going on around you and the demands on you it sets us all up and prepares us for life and the challenges ahead.
It really does. It's so important. I sometimes think I still have dreams that I drive around looking at help wanted signs. And I've actually thought if ever I got to a place where I felt unhappy or something, I would actually go back to that, because I think it's important to I don't know. I think that's very important to do that.
Breadth of experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Molly, thank you so much. Molly Shannon, it's been an absolute delight to have you as our podcast guest today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, President Hamilton. I really enjoyed talking to you.